Good morning. It's Fresh Friday, and I'm Crystal Woods with Seasons in the Vine. Today, we're going to continue our talk on seasons of waiting, but this is part two. So if you haven't seen part one, which was last week, you need to go listen to it because I'm not repeating the same stuff. But it's all good, I promise. And so waiting is something that all of us will experience in different areas of our life. We may have 90% of our life moving in the direction that we want and 10% just kind of lagging behind, or we may be waiting for some kind of healing or restoration or a success or just to finish something. If we're in the process of maybe even finishing a degree. And so waiting is part of what we all have to experience. And so I felt like last week I had covered a good bit of material, but then I knew that wasn't all of it. And so the biggest question that I really want to cover today when we're talking about waiting is something to kind of hold ourselves to is, are we becoming like Jesus in our waiting? And I can tell you in full transparency, this week I've not been a lot like Jesus in the waiting. I've been a lot like human Crystal, whose flesh is like screaming and not very happy. And so, I ask you that question because I'm asking myself that question, and really how do I become like Jesus in the waiting? And it's about surrendering to His Spirit, like and trusting. We talked a little bit about trust last week, but it's really a matter of trusting what I know about God to be true. That's kind of what I'm talking about more today. When I really remember who God is and how much He cares for me and all my situations and how much He's working in my life and in His own kingdom. Well, when I can remember that and trust in that, then I do really well with growing great fruit during a season of waiting. However, if I am forgetting that or looking more at the circumstance around the waiting, then I definitely will be battling more human responses to that. And the fruit that I produce is going to be perhaps anger, frustration, and bitterness. Certainly not love and joy and kindness and gentleness. And so definitely hitting hard at myself today as well. So always know that too when I share these messages, they're really coming from a place not of me having been done with all of these things, right? But out of walking through them myself, and then we can just kind of help each other along. And so I do have a couple notes today, which is somewhat unusual. One of the things that's super important to remember, which I began to hit on towards the end of my message last week, is that there is fruit that can only be grown when you're waiting. And so that's the kind of fruit you really want to invest in, because when we're not waiting, we're certainly not going to be growing that kind of fruit. So it's an opportunity. And I talk a lot about opportunity on these Fresh Fridays because I think if we view life as an opportunity to consistently grow and change into the likeness of Jesus and into a life that's dependent on the Spirit and led by the Spirit, well, then we're going to exhibit great fruit and really be able to walk and navigate these different seasons in a lot of grace. And so I definitely want to focus on the fruit that can only be grown in the waiting. And for me, that's going to be a lot of patience for sure. But I think kindness and gentleness, those are like the first things to just hop right out when I'm feeling frustrated about waiting for something. And so that kind of spills over into my own self-talk and then how I talk to others or engage with others. And it's just not pretty, folks. And so at Seasons in the Vine, I'm devoted to learning how to grow fruit in every season, and godly fruit and beautiful fruit. And so what kind of fruit do you know personally can you only grow in the waiting? What is it that God is still trying to do? Because it's not like we're in the waiting for no purpose. He doesn't work that way. We're in the waiting for His purposes and for what He wants to do. And so keep that in mind and really examine yourself. What is God trying to do in the waiting? What is he really trying to grow in you? And it could be all kinds of different stuff, but strategies to fight against hopelessness, or growing your faith, or growing your trust, or having patience, kindness, and gentleness, maintaining joy. There's so many. So think about that. I pray the Holy Spirit is speaking to you even now so that you can begin to see why you're waiting and what is the purpose beyond just the season unfolding into something else. There is something more. There's something for you. There's this song, He's in the Waiting. I think that's what it's called. But basically it's like, take courage and don't lose your hope, because he's in the waiting. There's a way that you can learn to grow, to know God only in seasons of waiting. Does that make sense? So in seasons where you're not waiting, you'll know God a certain way. And then in seasons you are waiting, it's another opportunity to know him in a different way and in a different level. Are we remaining soft and tender-hearted? So that can be another thing that just kind of hits the road when we are in waiting. And so that's something we can really ponder with the Lord and ask him to renew a tender heart in us, and to create a pure heart that's for what he's trying to accomplish, despite the fact that it makes our flesh scream and die 1,000 different ways. And so keep that in mind. Is my heart soft? Because as soon as you get that hard heart, well, then bitterness comes knocking on your door, and bitterness will lead down roads of destruction over and over and over again. And so we definitely want to protect ourselves in the waiting against that bitterness. So if you have bitterness in your heart, like, stop today. Come clean with the Lord and really ask him to heal you from that and work through it with him. Don't mask your feelings. Don't push it down, because it's there. So it needs to be addressed fully, and it needs to be healed. We don't need to shove it down and pretend, I'm not bitter, I'm not bitter. If there's a bitter root, you need to investigate that with the Lord. And he's so faithful to walk into those situations with you and heal you from that and help you see where that bitterness is coming from. Maybe some disappointment or a broken heart. And boy, that's the business that he's in, is binding all of those areas up. And so bitterness is definitely a fruit that you can grow to know that your heart is sick and your soul is sick and needs some tending, or maybe a lot of tending, not some tending. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I'm keeping this video short today, in our part 2, is that it's super important to keep our hope on Jesus and who he is and the kind of God that he is and his love for us. Because when we focus on the circumstances and then things consistently not move the way we want, well, then we're putting our hope in the wrong thing. And we must stop ourselves when we begin to think on the wrong things or put our hope in the wrong things. Take those thoughts and make them captive. Take them captive and make them obedient to what God is doing. Because in that, then our hope is maintained on really the only place our hope ever comes from, which is the Lord. Not people doing what we desire them to do, not a better job coming down the road, not financial freedom, not a healed sickness. Those are things that we can be praying for and waiting for, but our hope is always, always in Jesus and what he accomplished on the cross and our eternity with him. Stay focused on that, and your hope will be able to withstand what is happening in your season of waiting and those circumstances not going the way you desire them to do all the time. Because let's just face it, this world is fickle and we're fickle. And so, my gosh, we can never put our hope in that and expect to have any kind of perseverance in the waiting. And so I leave you with that. Some questions, definitely, some things to ponder. Know that you don't want it early. You want the waiting to accomplish its work in your life. And so submit yourself to the Lord and what he's trying to do in the waiting, and allow yourself to grow some amazing fruit. And I'm going to be doing the same thing. Always know that I'm fighting here alongside of all of you. Thanks so much for listening, and feel free to like, share, or comment. See you guys next Friday. Bye.